The notification sound from my phone made my stomach drop. Not because of what it said, but because of how Jonas looked at me when it chimed. That cold, calculating stare I'd never seen before in our 8 years of marriage. Keys through council, Monday service. 7 words that shattered everything I thought I'd built so carefully. 7 words that told me my husband had discovered what I believed was impossible to find. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I thought I was so clever, so entitled to my little escapes. My name is Evadne Rellis, and 3 months ago, I was living what I considered a perfectly balanced double life. At 34, I worked as a receptionist at Dr. Margot Brin's family clinic, managing appointments and insurance paperwork for 40 hours a week. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me access to something invaluable, believable excuses. "I'm absolutely exhausted, Jonas," I said that first Tuesday evening in March, rubbing my temples dramatically as I stood in our modest suburban kitchen. Dr. Brin had me staying late again to catch up on the Medicare billing. "I feel like my brain is going to explode." Jonas looked up from helping our 7-year-old daughter Lena with her math homework at the kitchen table. At 37, my husband had the kind of steady, methodical personality that made him perfect for running his small courier business. He specialized in same-day delivery for legal firms and medical offices, which meant he understood long hours and work stress. "Maybe you should take a hot bath and get to bed early," he suggested, his voice carrying that familiar tone of genuine concern that made my chest tighten with guilt. Not enough guilt to stop me, of course, but enough to make me work harder at selling my story. "I was thinking," I said, opening the refrigerator and pretending to look for something while I delivered my carefully rehearsed line. "Maybe I should just get a hotel room tonight. Somewhere quiet where I can actually rest without worrying about anything. Just one night to reset." Lena's pencil stopped moving across her worksheet. "Mummy, why can't you rest here?" The innocence in her question almost broke my resolve. Almost. But then I thought about Damon Voss, the travel agent I'd been messaging for 3 weeks, and how he'd promised to arrange something special for us. "Sometimes grown-ups need a different kind of quiet, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Daddy will make you pancakes for breakfast, won't you, Jonas?" My husband nodded slowly, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sure. The Hampton Inn downtown has good reviews. Want me to book you a room?" No, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I already called. They have availability." That was lie number 1 in what would become an avalanche of deception. I hadn't called the Hampton Inn. Damon had texted me 20 minutes earlier. "Room set for tonight, vendor rate. Check in after 7 p.m. Jonas went back to helping Lena with her homework, but I caught him glancing at me twice more before I headed upstairs to pack an overnight bag. Each glance felt heavier than the last, though at the time I convinced myself he was just worried about me working too hard. I threw some clothes into my weekend bag, including the black dress I'd bought the week before and never worn in front of Jonas. In the bathroom, I packed my good makeup, the expensive foundation I saved for special occasions. Looking at myself in the mirror, I practiced my tired expression one more time. "You deserve this," I whispered to my reflection. "You work hard. You take care of everyone. You're entitled to some happiness." The woman staring back at me nodded in agreement. She looked convincing in her exhaustion, believable in her need for rest. She had no idea that her husband's methodical mind was already filing away inconsistencies, or that his courier business had taught him to notice patterns and document everything. When I came back downstairs with my bag, Jonas was loading the dishwasher while Lena watched cartoons in the living room. "I should be back by checkout time tomorrow," I said, kissing his cheek. His skin felt warm and familiar, and for a moment I wavered. "Maybe we can take Lena to the park this weekend." "That sounds nice," he said, but his voice had that distant quality that should have warned me. "Drive safely. Text when you get there." Of course. I was already mentally composing the text I'd send from the hotel lobby, the one that would say I'd arrived safely and was looking forward to a good night's sleep. It would be technically true. I would be in the hotel lobby when I sent it. I'd become an expert at technical truths. The drive downtown took 25 minutes in evening traffic. I parked in the hotel garage and checked my appearance in the rearview mirror one more time before walking to the elevator. My phone buzzed with a message from Damon. Already checked in, room 847, can't wait to see you. My heart raced as I rode the elevator up, not from guilt but from excitement. This was my time, my choice, my escape from the routine of marriage and motherhood and endless insurance forms. I deserved this adventure. Room 847 was at the end of the hall, and Damon opened the door before I could knock. At 35, he was everything Jonas wasn't. Spontaneous, charming, full of stories about exotic destinations and romantic getaways. His job at Premier Travel Solutions gave him access to discounted rates and insider knowledge about the best places to disappear for a few hours. "You look incredible," he said, pulling me into the room. "How did the husband take it?" "Like always," I replied, setting down my bag. "He's so trusting it's almost painful." We spent the next 4 hours talking, laughing, and doing things I told myself weren't really cheating because Jonas and I had grown so distant lately. When Damon ordered room service at 10 p.m., I took a photo of the city lights from our window and posted it to my private Instagram story with the caption, "Sometimes you need a break from everything." I didn't tag the location. I wasn't stupid. At 11:30, I sent Jonas a text. "Settled in and feeling better already. See you tomorrow. Love you." He responded immediately. "Good. Get some rest." 3 words that seemed normal then, but would later feel like a warning I was too blind to see. The second hotel night happened 3 weeks later, and by then I'd perfected my system. I'd created a fake email account, downloaded a dating app, and crafted a profile that described me as exploring new connections, without mentioning my marriage or daughter. The biophoto was carefully cropped to show just enough to be intriguing, without being recognizable to anyone who knew me casually. Damon and I had exchanged over 100 messages by then, planning our meetings with the precision of a military operation. He'd taught me how to book rooms using his vendor discount codes, how to time my arrivals to avoid the busiest check-in hours, and how to pay in ways that wouldn't immediately flag on our joint account. "Dr. Bryn is having me work late again," I told Jonas on that second Tuesday, using the same exhausted tone that had worked so well before. "The state insurance audit is killing me. I think I need another hotel night to decompress." This time, Jonas looked up from his laptop where he was reviewing delivery schedules for the next day. 2 hotel nights in 3 weeks? That seems like a lot. The question caught me off guard, but I'd prepared for this possibility. "You know how these audit cycles work. Remember when your business got audited by the State Transportation Department? You barely slept for a month." It was a perfect comparison because it was true, and it reminded Jonas of his own stressful period without making him feel guilty for questioning me. I watched his face soften as he remembered those difficult weeks. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry. I just worry about you pushing yourself too hard." "That's exactly why I need the break," I said, moving behind his chair to massage his shoulders. "One quiet night, and I'll be back to normal." Lena was already asleep, so I didn't have to navigate her questions this time. I packed the same overnight bag, but this time I included the red lingerie I'd bought online and had delivered to my office. Dr. Bryn's clinic received dozens of packages daily, so one more never raised suspicions. The drive to the hotel felt routine now, comfortable. I knew which parking spots had the best elevator access, which route through the lobby avoided the main desk camera, and how to time my arrival to match Damon's schedule. He'd texted me the room number during my lunch break. Room 623. Brought champagne this time. But as I walked through the hotel lobby, something felt different. The desk clerk, a young woman with bright pink highlights, looked at me twice. Not with suspicion, exactly, but with recognition. "Good evening, Mrs. Rellis," she said as I passed the front desk. Back for another restful stay? I froze. She knew my name, remembered me from 3 weeks ago. That meant other staff might remember me too. It meant I was becoming visible in a place where I needed to remain anonymous. Yes, I managed to say. Work has been overwhelming. I completely understand, she replied with a smile that seemed genuine. Room service ends at midnight if you need anything. I nodded and hurried to the elevator, my heart pounding. In room 623, Damon was waiting with champagne and Chinese takeout, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my carefully constructed invisibility was starting to crack. You seem tense, Damon said as he poured champagne into plastic cups. Rough day at the office. The desk clerk recognized me, I said. She remembered my name from last time. Damon shrugged. That's good customer service. It means we're building a relationship with the staff. That's actually helpful for future bookings. His casual attitude should have reassured me, but instead it highlighted how differently we viewed the situation. For Damon, this was an adventure with convenient benefits. For me, this was my entire life balanced on a knife's edge, and that edge was getting sharper every time I walked through that lobby. We spent the evening the same way as before, talking and touching and pretending we were different people living different lives. But when Damon fell asleep around midnight, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Jonas's question. 2 hotel nights in 3 weeks? That seems like a lot. It did seem like a lot, but it also felt necessary, like medicine I needed to function in my regular life. The excitement, the secrecy, the feeling of being desired by someone who didn't know about my morning routine or my daughter's homework struggles. It was addictive in a way I hadn't anticipated. At 6 a.m., I dressed quietly and slipped out of the room while Damon slept. The same desk clerk was ending her shift, and she waved goodbye as I passed. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Rellis. We'll see you again soon, I'm sure. The drive home took me through neighborhoods that looked different in the early morning light. Suburban houses with newspapers and driveways, joggers starting their daily routes, school buses beginning their rounds. Normal people living normal lives, not sneaking home from hotel rooms with the scent of another man's cologne still clinging to their clothes. Jonas was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in, still wearing yesterday's work clothes and carrying my overnight bag. How did you sleep? He asked, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. Much better, I said. I feel completely refreshed. He nodded and handed me a cup of coffee, but his eyes lingered on my face longer than usual. Good. Lena missed you at bedtime, but she understood that Mommy needed rest. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. While I was drinking champagne and playing pretend with Damon, my daughter had gone to bed missing me. While I was convincing myself I deserved this escape, Jonas had handled the evening routine alone, again. I'll make it up to her, I said. Maybe we can do something special this weekend. She'd like that, Jonas said, but he was already turning back to his laptop, checking his delivery schedule for the day. I went upstairs to shower and change, and in the bathroom mirror, I practiced my normal expression, my wife and mother face. The woman looking back at me seemed tired but satisfied, like someone who'd gotten exactly the rest she needed. She had no idea that Jonas had spent part of the previous evening reviewing our joint bank account, noting the hotel charges that appeared every few weeks. She didn't know that his courier business had taught him to track patterns and document irregularities, or that his methodical mind was already building a timeline of her absences. Most importantly, she didn't know that Jonas had started taking screenshots. By May, I had perfected my routine to an art form. Hotel stays every 2 to 3 weeks, always on weekdays, always with the same exhaustion excuse. Dr. Brin's clinic provided endless cover stories, insurance audits, system updates, training seminars that required late nights and early mornings. Jonas had stopped questioning the pattern, which I interpreted as acceptance rather than the strategic patience it actually was. My dating app profile had evolved too. What started as a simple, exploring connections had become a detailed fantasy of who I wanted to be. I describe myself as a healthcare professional seeking adventure, someone ready for spontaneous getaways and meaningful conversations. I posted photos, carefully cropped to avoid showing my wedding ring or any identifying features of our house. Damon and I had exchanged over 300 messages by then, planning not just our hotel meetings, but elaborate fantasies about trips we might take together. He'd shown me how to use his travel industry connections to book romantic weekends in wine country, beach resorts, mountain cabins. We hadn't actually taken any of these trips yet, but the planning felt almost as exciting as the reality. "I've been thinking," Damon said during our third hotel meeting in May, "maybe it's time we did something bigger than these evening escapes." We were lying in bed at the Hampton Inn, room 934 this time, sharing a bottle of wine he'd brought from his personal collection. Outside our window, the city sparkled in the darkness, full of possibilities and adventures I'd never explored with Jonas. "What do you mean, bigger?" I asked, though my heart was already racing with anticipation. "A weekend away, somewhere beautiful, somewhere we can actually relax instead of watching the clock." He pulled out his phone and showed me photos of a boutique hotel in Napa Valley. "I can get us a suite for practically nothing through my industry contacts. You could tell your husband it's a work retreat." The photos were stunning. Vineyard views, a private balcony, a bathroom bigger than our bedroom at home. I could picture myself there, wearing the sundresses I never had occasion to wear in my regular life, drinking wine at 2 p.m. without worrying about school pickup or dinner preparation. "It's tempting," I said, and I meant it. But a whole weekend would be harder to explain. "Healthcare conferences happen on weekends all the time," Damon said. "Continuing education requirements, networking events. Your husband doesn't work in healthcare. He wouldn't know the difference." He was right, of course. Jonas's world of courier services and delivery schedules was completely separate from my clinic environment. I could probably convince him that a weekend conference was not only normal, but necessary for maintaining my certification. "Let me think about it," I said, but we both knew I'd already decided. That night, I went home and immediately started researching healthcare conferences that might provide cover for a weekend away. I found several that sounded plausible: a billing and coding update seminar, a patient privacy compliance workshop, a new technology training for medical office staff. Jonas was asleep when I got home, but he'd left a note on my pillow. "Hope you got the rest you needed. Lena drew you a picture. It's on the fridge. Love, Jay." The picture was a crayon drawing of our family standing in front of our house, all three of us holding hands and smiling. Lena had written, "I love Mommy," in purple letters across the top, with hearts scattered around the border. Standing in our kitchen at midnight, still wearing the dress I'd chosen specifically for Damon to see, I stared at that drawing and felt something crack inside my chest. Not enough to stop me, but enough to make me pour a glass of wine and sit at the kitchen table for 20 minutes, looking at my daughter's innocent artwork. When I finally went upstairs, Jonas was still sleeping peacefully on his side of the bed. I slipped in beside him, and he unconsciously moved closer, his arm draping across my waist in the familiar gesture that had comforted me for 8 years of marriage. For a moment, I considered waking him up. I imagined confessing everything: the app, the messages, the hotel rooms, the growing desire to disappear for entire weekends. I pictured his face, the hurt and confusion and betrayal that would replace the trust he'd always shown me. Instead, I closed my eyes and planned my conference story. The next morning, I approached the subject over breakfast while Lena ate cereal and Jonas checked his delivery schedule on his tablet. "Dr. Bryn mentioned something interesting yesterday," I said, buttering my toast with careful casualness. "There's a healthcare compliance conference in Sacramento next month. Continuing education credits, networking opportunities, That kind of thing. Jonas looked up from his tablet. Sounds useful. Is it during the week? Weekend, unfortunately. Friday through Sunday. But the credits are required for maintaining certification, and the clinic would pay for it. This was lie number 15, though I'd stopped counting by then. The clinic hadn't mentioned any conferences, wouldn't pay for weekend travel, and I didn't need continuing education credits for a receptionist position. That's a long weekend to be away, Jonas said, and something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. I know, and I hate to leave you with Lena for 3 days, but these requirements aren't optional. Lena looked up from her cereal. Mommy, why do you have to go away so much for work? The question hit me like a slap. In her 7-year-old mind, she was simply asking about something she'd noticed: her mother's increasing absences, the hotel stays, the work trips that seemed to happen more and more frequently. Sometimes grown-up jobs require special training, I said, the lie rolling off my tongue with practiced ease. It's boring stuff, sweetie. You'll have more fun staying home with Daddy. Jonas was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't read. Later, I would learn that he was memorizing every word, cataloguing every inconsistency, building a case I couldn't see coming. When is this conference? He asked. The 3rd weekend in June. I know it's short notice, but these opportunities don't come up often. I'll make sure my schedule is clear, he said, returning to his tablet. Maybe Mum and Dad can come help with Lena. The mention of his parents sent a chill through me. Mira and Paul Rellis were traditional, conservative people who believed in marriage vows and family obligations. They'd never approved of my working outside the home, and they'd certainly never understand the kind of rest I'd been seeking in hotel rooms. That's not necessary, I said quickly. You're perfectly capable of handling one weekend. I know I am, Jonas said, but Lena enjoys time with her grandparents, and they've been asking to see more of her. There was something final in his tone that discouraged further argument. I finished my breakfast and got ready for work, but the conversation lingered in my mind all day. That evening, Damon texted me. Napa weekend is confirmed. June 18th to 20. Sent you the hotel details. I deleted the message immediately, as I always did, but not before screenshotting the hotel information and saving it to a hidden folder on my phone. What I didn't know was that Jonas had already installed monitoring software on our shared cloud account, and every photo I saved was automatically backing up to a server he could access from his office computer. I also didn't know that he'd spent his lunch break that day visiting the clinic where I worked, not to check up on me, but to ask Dr. Bryn about continuing education requirements for medical office staff. Receptionists don't need continuing education credits, Dr. Bryn had told him. And we certainly don't send them to weekend conferences. Is Evadne telling you otherwise? Jonas had thanked her for the information and left without explaining why he'd asked. But that night, while I was in the shower, he'd opened his laptop and started documenting everything he'd learned. The digital trail I thought I was hiding so carefully was actually a roadmap leading straight to my destruction. Every deleted message, every hidden photo, every carefully crafted lie was being recorded and preserved by systems I didn't understand, and a husband I'd completely underestimated. But I felt invincible, entitled to my secrets and my adventures. I had no idea that Jonas was 3 steps ahead of me, methodically building a case that would destroy not just my marriage, but my entire life. The Napa Valley weekend arrived faster than I'd expected, and with it came a level of deception that should have terrified me. Instead, I felt exhilarated by the complexity of my own lies, proud of how seamlessly I'd woven together a story that Jonas seemed to accept completely. The conference starts Friday afternoon, I told him Thursday night as I packed my weekend bag. Check-in is at the hotel, then opening reception at 6. Full schedule Saturday, wrap-up session Sunday morning. Jonas was helping Lena with a school project at the kitchen table, but I could feel him listening to every word. His parents were coming Saturday to help with Lena, which meant I needed to be extra careful about my cover story. "What's the hotel like?" he asked, not looking up from Lena's poster board about butterfly migration. "Nothing fancy," I said, though Damon had booked us a suite at a boutique resort that cost more per night than Jonas made in a week. "Just a standard conference hotel. You know how these things are. All business, no pleasure." Lena looked up from coloring her butterfly drawings. "Can I call you while you're gone, Mummy?" The innocent question made my stomach clench. I'd be spending the weekend in bed with Damon, exploring wine country, pretending to be someone completely different from Lena's mother. "Of course, sweetheart. But remember, I'll be in meetings most of the time." "I know," she said, returning to her coloring. "Daddy explained that work meetings are important, and I shouldn't interrupt unless it's an emergency." I glanced at Jonas, surprised. "You explained that?" "She asked why you've been going to so many work events lately," he said, still focused on the butterfly project. "I told her that your job requires special training sometimes." There was something in his tone that made me pause, but before I could analyze it further, my phone buzzed with a text from Damon. "Can't wait for tomorrow. This is going to be incredible." I deleted the message immediately and finished packing, including the designer dress I'd bought specifically for this weekend and charged to a credit card Jonas didn't monitor. Friday morning, I left for Sacramento with a kiss goodbye and promises to call that evening. The drive to Napa took 2 hours, and with every mile I felt more like the woman I wanted to be and less like the suburban mother I'd become. Damon was waiting in the resort lobby when I arrived, looking more handsome than ever, in casual clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The resort was everything he'd promised. Elegant, romantic, designed for couples who wanted to disappear from their regular lives. "Welcome to our weekend," he said, kissing me in full view of the lobby staff. "I've planned everything perfectly." Our suite overlooked rolling vineyards, with a private balcony and a bathroom that featured a soaking tub big enough for 2. Room service had already delivered champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries, along with a handwritten note welcoming us to the resort. "This is incredible," I said, spinning around the living room like a teenager. "I feel like a completely different person here." "That's the point," Damon said, pulling me close. "For the next 3 days, you're not a wife or a mother or a clinic receptionist. You're just Evadne, and you can be anyone you want to be." We spent Friday afternoon exploring the resort, drinking wine at the poolside bar, and taking photos that I carefully avoided posting anywhere Jonas might see them. That evening, we had dinner at the resort's 5-star restaurant, where Damon charmed the sommelier into bringing us their most expensive wines to taste. "To new adventures," he said, raising his glass as the sun set over the vineyard. "To new adventures," I agreed, feeling more alive than I had in years. Saturday morning, we drove through wine country in Damon's convertible, stopping at boutique wineries, where he used his industry connections to arrange private tastings. I bought a silk scarf at one winery, a bottle of expensive olive oil at another. Small treasures that would remind me of this perfect weekend. But it was Saturday evening that everything changed. We were having dinner at a restaurant Damon had chosen specifically for its romantic atmosphere. Candlelight, live jazz, tables positioned for intimate conversation. I was wearing the designer dress, feeling beautiful and desired, when my phone rang. "Mommy?" Lena's voice was small and scared. "I had a bad dream and I can't find Daddy." My heart stopped. "What do you mean you can't find Daddy? Where are you?" "I'm in my room. Grandma and Grandpa are downstairs watching TV, but I want Daddy and he's not here." I looked across the table at Damon, who was frowning at the interruption. The restaurant suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too far from home. "Let me talk to Grandma," I said, stepping away from the table. Evadne Rellis came on the line a moment later, her voice tight with concern. "Evadne, Jonas had to make an emergency delivery, some kind of legal document that couldn't wait until Monday. He should be back within an hour." "Is Lena okay?" "She's fine. Just a little unsettled. She's been asking about you all day. When will you be home from your conference? The question hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, hundreds of miles from home, drinking expensive wine with my lover, while my daughter needed comfort and my husband was working late on a Saturday night. Tomorrow evening, I managed to say. Tell Lena I love her and I'll call her in the morning. When I returned to the table, Damon was already ordering another bottle of wine. Everything okay at home? Just a bad dream, I said, but the magic of the evening had evaporated. All I could think about was Lena's scared voice and Jonas making emergency deliveries on Saturday night while I pretended to be at a conference that didn't exist. You look upset, Damon said. Don't let home drama ruin our perfect weekend. His casual dismissal of my daughter's fear sparked something ugly inside me. That's my child, Damon. She's not home drama. I know, he said quickly. I just meant that you deserve this time away. You work so hard, you sacrifice so much. One weekend shouldn't make you feel guilty. He was saying exactly what I'd been telling myself for months, but somehow hearing it from him made it sound selfish and hollow. I spent the rest of dinner distracted, checking my phone every few minutes for updates from home. Back in our suite, I called Jonas's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried the house phone and got his mother again. He's still not back, Mira said, but Lena is asleep now. Paul read her 3 stories and she finally settled down. What kind of emergency delivery takes this long? Something for a law firm downtown. You know how these legal things are. Everything is urgent and confidential. After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not with the delivery, but with the whole situation. Jonas had never mentioned working Saturday nights before, and it seemed like a strange coincidence that it would happen during my first weekend away. Damon tried to distract me with champagne and massages, but I spent most of Sunday morning on the resort balcony, staring at my phone and waiting for updates from home. When Jonas finally called at noon, his voice sounded different, distant, formal. How's the conference going? He asked. Fine, I said. Lots of information about compliance updates. How's Lena? She's good. We're at the park with Mom and Dad. She wanted me to tell you about the butterfly she found. In the background, I could hear Lena's laughter and the voices of his parents, normal family sounds, the kind of Sunday afternoon I was missing to play, pretend with a man who called my daughter home drama. I'll be home around 6, I said. Tell her I can't wait to hear about the butterfly. Drive safely, Jonas said, and hung up without saying he loved me. The drive home from Napa felt endless. Damon had wanted to extend our checkout time, maybe grab lunch at another winery, but I needed to get back to my real life. The weekend that had felt so perfect 24 hours earlier now seemed like an expensive mistake. When I walked into our house at 6:15, Lena ran to me with the enthusiasm that always made my heart ache. She smelled like sunshine and playground mulch, and she chatted non-stop about her weekend with her grandparents. Jonas was in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner. He greeted me with a brief hug and asked polite questions about my conference, but something fundamental had shifted between us. He seemed to be watching me differently, listening more carefully to my answers. Learn anything useful? He asked as I unpacked my weekend bag. The usual updates, I said. New regulations, documentation requirements, pretty boring stuff. He nodded and returned to loading the dishwasher, but I caught him looking at the silk scarf I'd bought at the winery. I'd forgotten it was visible in my bag, a bright splash of color that definitely didn't come from a conference hotel gift shop. Pretty scarf, he said. Conference swag? They had a little boutique in the hotel lobby, I said, the lie coming easily. I thought it might brighten up my work clothes. Jonas smiled and nodded, but later I would learn that he'd spent part of that weekend researching the hotel where I'd claimed to stay. He'd discovered that the conference I'd described didn't exist, that the hotel I'd named didn't have a boutique, and that the entire story I'd constructed was falling apart under basic scrutiny. Most importantly, he'd used his emergency delivery as cover to install additional monitoring software on our shared accounts and devices. While I was drinking wine in Napa, he was systematically documenting every aspect of my deception. But that Sunday night, I felt like I'd gotten away with the perfect crime. I'd had my adventure, satisfied my desires, and returned home to a family that seemed none the wiser. I had no idea that Jonas was already 3 moves ahead, building a case that would destroy everything I thought I'd built so carefully. June turned into July, and my confidence grew with each successful hotel stay. I'd perfected the art of the exhausted clinic worker, the dedicated employee who sometimes needed quiet nights away from home to recharge. Jonas seemed to accept this pattern, even suggesting hotel stays when I looked particularly tired. "Maybe you should book a room tonight," he'd say after I'd complained about Dr. Brin's demands or insurance company deadlines. "You look like you could use some uninterrupted sleep." His supportiveness should have made me feel guilty, but instead, it made me feel justified. If my own husband thought I needed these breaks, then I really did deserve them, didn't I? Damon and I had settled into a routine of meeting twice a week, once for our hotel evenings, once for coffee or lunch during my work breaks. He'd become an expert at reading my schedule, knowing exactly when to text and when to stay silent. Our message count had grown to over 400, a digital record of an affair that felt more real than my marriage. "I've been thinking about our next weekend getaway," Damon said during a Wednesday lunch at a cafe downtown. "There's a resort in Mendocino that's supposed to be incredible. Ocean views, private cottages, world-class spa." I stirred my salad, imagining myself in a cottage overlooking the Pacific, far from insurance forms and parent-teacher conferences, and Jonas's methodical questions about my work schedule. "When were you thinking?" "End of July. I could book us something for 3 nights, Thursday through Sunday. You could tell your husband it's another conference." The idea thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. 3 nights was longer than I'd ever been away, and it would require more elaborate lies than I'd attempted before. But the thought of that much uninterrupted time with Damon, that much freedom from my regular life, was intoxicating. "I'll think about it," I said, but we both knew I'd already decided. That afternoon, I returned to the clinic, energized by the possibility of another escape. Dr. Brin was reviewing patient files when I walked in, and she looked up with a concerned expression. "Evadne, I need to ask you about something. I had a strange conversation with your husband a few weeks ago." My blood turned to ice. "Jonas came here. He stopped by during lunch and asked about continuing education requirements for medical office staff. Specifically, he wanted to know if we send receptionists to weekend conferences." The room started spinning. Jonas had been here, asking questions, checking my stories. How long had he been suspicious? What else had he discovered? "I told him that receptionists don't need continuing education credits," Dr. Brin continued, "and that we certainly don't pay for weekend conferences." He seemed satisfied with the answer, but it made me wonder, "Have you been telling him that your job requires additional training?" I forced my voice to remain steady. There might have been a misunderstanding. I mentioned looking into some voluntary certification programs, and maybe he misinterpreted that as a work requirement. Dr. Brin studied my face for a long moment. "I see. Well, just to be clear, any training or certification you pursue would be at your own expense and on your own time. We don't have budget for professional development for reception staff." "Of course," I said, "I understand completely." I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of barely controlled panic. Jonas had been investigating my stories, fact-checking my lies with my employer. What else had he discovered? Had he seen the hotel charges on our joint account? Had he noticed the patterns in my absences? That evening, I watched him carefully for signs of suspicion or anger, but he seemed completely normal. He helped Lena with her summer reading, grilled hamburgers for dinner, and asked about my day at work with the same casual interest he'd always shown. Dr. Bryn mentioned you stopped by the clinic a few weeks ago, I said as we were cleaning up after dinner. Jonas paused in his dishwashing. I was in the neighborhood making a delivery and thought I'd say hello. She seemed busy, so I didn't stay long. She said you asked about continuing education requirements. Did I? He resumed washing dishes, his tone perfectly casual. I don't really remember. Maybe I was making conversation about your work. His response seemed genuine, but something in his body language felt rehearsed. Later, I would learn that Jonas had spent hours practicing this conversation, anticipating my questions and preparing answers that would deflect suspicion while revealing how much he actually knew. That night, after Lena was asleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Jonas read a thriller novel beside me. The man I'd been married to for 8 years, the father of my daughter, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. Had he figured out what I was doing? Was he playing some kind of long game, waiting for the right moment to confront me? Or was I paranoid, seeing threats where none existed because my own guilt was finally catching up with me? I rolled over and studied his profile in the lamplight. He looked the same as always, steady, reliable, focused on his book. But there was something different about the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, that made me wonder if the Jonas I thought I knew had been replaced by someone more calculating. I love you, I said suddenly, needing to hear his response. Love you too, he replied without looking up from his book. 2 words that should have reassured me, but somehow felt like a question I couldn't answer. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day going through our house, looking for signs that Jonas had been searching through my things. I checked my dresser drawers, my jewelry box, the pockets of jackets I rarely wore. Everything seemed normal, undisturbed. But when I opened my laptop, I noticed something strange. The browser history I'd carefully deleted the night before was still there. Searches for weekend getaways, hotel reviews, restaurant recommendations in wine country. Either I'd forgotten to delete it properly, or someone had restored it after I'd cleared it. My hand shook as I deleted the history again, this time using a more thorough method I found online. But the damage was done. If Jonas had seen those searches, he knew I'd been planning trips that had nothing to do with work conferences. That afternoon, while Lena was at day camp, I drove to an electronics store and bought a new phone with cash. I transferred my dating app to the new device and deleted it from my regular phone, creating a separation between my 2 lives that felt safer but also more real. The new phone made the affair feel more serious, more intentional. I wasn't just a married woman having a momentary lapse in judgment. I was someone actively maintaining a double life with dedicated tools and careful planning. But it also made me feel more secure. With a completely separate device for my communications with Damon, Jonas couldn't accidentally discover our messages or monitor my activities. I was back in control of my own secrets. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that Jonas had already documented everything he needed. The browser history, the hotel charges, the dating app activity, it was all preserved in files I couldn't access or delete. My new phone wasn't protecting me from discovery. It was just creating additional evidence of premeditation and deception. That evening, Jonas made my favorite dinner and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. We sat on our back patio after Lena went to bed, watching fireflies and talking about everything except the secrets that were eating me alive. You seem stressed lately, he said, refilling my wine glass. Work getting to you? A little, I said. Dr. Bryn has been piling on extra projects, and the summer schedule is always chaotic. Maybe you should take some time off. A real vacation, not just those hotel stays when you're exhausted. The suggestion caught me off guard. What kind of vacation? I don't know. Somewhere relaxing. Maybe that spa resort you mentioned a while back. I had never mentioned a spa resort to Jonas, but Damon and I had discussed several during our planning sessions for future getaways. If Jonas knew about those conversations, it meant he'd been monitoring my communications more thoroughly than I'd imagined. That sounds nice, I said carefully. Maybe we could plan something for the fall. Or you could go sooner, he said. This month even. You've been working so hard, you deserve a real break. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. In the dim patio light, his expression seemed almost sad, like he was offering me something he knew I didn't deserve. Are you trying to get rid of me? I asked, attempting a joke. Never, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. I just want you to be happy. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to Jonas's steady breathing, I realized that he'd given me permission to disappear for a weekend without any questions or explanations. It was exactly what I'd been hoping for, the perfect opportunity to take that Mendocino trip with Damon. So, why did it feel like a trap? The Mendocino weekend was everything Damon had promised and more. 4 days at an oceanfront resort, staying in a private cottage with panoramic views of the Pacific. We hiked coastal trails, visited art galleries, drank wine at sunset, while waves crashed against the rocks below our balcony. I'd told Jonas it was a wellness retreat, a chance to reset my mental health after months of work stress. He'd not only supported the idea, but had insisted on paying for it from our joint account. You work so hard for our family, he'd said while booking my retreat online. This is an investment in your well-being. The irony was almost unbearable. My husband was financing my affair, paying for me to spend 4 days with another man while he stayed home caring for our daughter, but I pushed the guilt aside and focused on the fantasy I was living. Damon had outdone himself with the planning. He'd arranged couples massages, private wine tastings, dinners at restaurants that required reservations months in advance. For 4 days, I lived like a woman whose only responsibility was her own pleasure. I could get used to this, I said on our last evening, watching the sunset from our cottage deck while Damon opened a bottle of champagne. Why couldn't we? He asked. I mean, really, why couldn't this be our real life? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities I'd been avoiding. Damon was suggesting something more permanent than hotel stays and weekend getaways. He was talking about leaving Jonas, disrupting Lena's life, choosing this fantasy over my family. It's complicated, I said, but even as I said it, I was imagining what it would feel like to wake up in this cottage every morning, to spend my days exploring coastal towns and my evenings drinking wine with a man who thought I was fascinating. It doesn't have to be, Damon said. People leave marriages all the time. They choose happiness over obligation. What about Lena? Kids are resilient. She'd adjust. And think about the example you'd be setting, showing her that women can choose their own paths, that they don't have to stay in situations that don't fulfill them. His words made my betrayal sound noble, like I was some kind of feminist pioneer instead of a woman cheating on her husband. It was exactly what I needed to hear to justify what I was already planning to do. On the drive home Sunday evening, I made a decision. I would give Jonas one more chance to be the husband I needed, more spontaneous, more romantic, more like Damon. If he couldn't change, if our marriage couldn't evolve into something more exciting, then I would choose the life that made me happy. I walked into our house Sunday night feeling empowered and decisive, ready to transform my marriage or end it. Jonas was in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner, and Lena was at the table working on a puzzle. "Mommy!" Lena ran to me with her usual enthusiasm, and I hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I missed you so much. Daddy and I made pancakes for breakfast, and we went to the zoo and we saw a baby elephant." Her excitement was infectious, and for a moment I felt the pull of my real life, the simple joy of being needed and loved by this perfect little person. "That sounds amazing, sweetheart. Tell me everything." As Lena chatted about her weekend adventures, I watched Jonas over her head. He was listening to our conversation with a small smile, but something in his posture seemed different, more alert, more focused, like he was memorizing every word. "How was your retreat?" he asked when Lena paused for breath. Exactly what I needed, I said. Very restorative. Good. You look refreshed. There was something in his tone that made me study his face more carefully. He seemed calmer than usual, like someone who'd made an important decision while I was away. That night, after Lena was asleep, Jonas suggested we open a bottle of wine and catch up properly. We sat in our living room, in the chairs where we'd had thousands of conversations over the years, and I waited for him to ask about my weekend. Instead, he talked about work. A new client who needed regular deliveries to law firms downtown. A complicated logistics challenge involving time-sensitive documents. The kind of methodical problem-solving that had always bored me, but that Jonas approached with genuine enthusiasm. Sounds like you had an interesting weekend too, I said when he finished describing a particularly complex delivery schedule. Very interesting, he agreed. I learned a lot. Something in his phrasing made me pause. Learned about what? Oh, just work stuff. Legal procedures, documentation requirements. You know how lawyers are about having everything properly recorded. I nodded and sipped my wine, but a chill was spreading through my chest. Jonas was being too casual, too conversational about topics that usually didn't interest me. It felt like he was trying to tell me something without actually saying it. I'm tired, I said, standing abruptly. I think I'll go to bed. Sweet dreams, Jonas said, but he made no move to follow me upstairs. I lay in bed for an hour, listening to him moving around the house, checking locks, turning off lights, following his usual nighttime routine. When he finally came to bed, he kissed my forehead and settled on his side of the mattress without trying to touch me or ask about my weekend. The distance should have been a relief. No awkward questions, no pretending to be more tired than I was. Instead, it felt ominous, like the calm before a storm I couldn't see coming. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find Jonas already gone. He'd left a note saying he had early deliveries and would be home by dinner. Nothing unusual. But when I checked our joint account online, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The charges from my Mendocino weekend were all there, itemized in detail. The resort, the restaurants, the spa treatments, everything Damon and I had done, documented with dates and amounts that painted a clear picture of a romantic getaway, not a wellness retreat. But more disturbing than the charges themselves was what Jonas had done with them. Each one had been categorized and labeled in our account management system. Personal travel, entertainment, spa services, clinical descriptions that turned my secret weekend into evidence. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing. Jonas had always been organized about our finances, but this level of detailed categorization was new. It looked less like household budgeting and more like preparation for something else entirely. My hands shook as I closed the laptop and got ready for work. At the clinic, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I made mistakes with patient files, double-booked appointments, forgot to return important calls. Dr. Bryn noticed my distraction by lunchtime. Evadne, is everything all right? You seem very scattered today. Just tired, I said. The retreat was relaxing, but the drive home was long. What kind of retreat was it? She asked, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. Wellness-focused, meditation, yoga, that sort of thing. Dr. Bryn nodded slowly. That sounds lovely. Where did you go? The question felt like a test, though I couldn't understand why. A place up the coast, very quiet, very restorative. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself, she said, but her expression remained concerned. Just try to focus this afternoon, okay? We have a lot of patients scheduled. I spent the rest of the day in a state of hypervigilance, analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning, every question for ulterior motives. By the time I got home, I was exhausted from the effort of appearing normal, while my world felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. Jonas was in the backyard with Lena, pushing her on the swing set he'd built 2 summers ago. They were laughing together, and the sound should have warmed my heart. Instead, it made me feel like an outsider, looking at a life I was no longer part of. "Daddy's teaching me to pump my legs," Lena called when she saw me. "Watch." I stood at the back door and watched my daughter swing higher and higher, her face bright with accomplishment. Jonas stood behind her, ready to catch her if she fell, the same way he'd always been there to catch both of us when we needed him. For the first time in months, I wondered what I was throwing away. Not just a marriage, but a family, a life, a man who loved me enough to finance my own betrayal because he thought it would make me happy. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Damon. "Missing you already? When can we plan our next escape?" And just like that, the guilt evaporated, replaced by anticipation for whatever adventure came next. I had no idea that Jonas was watching me through the kitchen window, noting the way my expression changed when I looked at my phone, documenting one more piece of evidence for a case I still couldn't see coming. The storm was about to break, and I was standing directly in its path. It happened on a Tuesday morning in August, exactly 4 months after my first hotel stay. I was getting ready for work, applying makeup in our bathroom mirror, when Jonas appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd never seen before. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his voice made me put down my lipstick. "Can it wait? I'm already running late." "No," he said, "it can't wait." He was holding a manila folder, thick with papers, and my stomach dropped even before he opened it. In that moment, I knew that my carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the bed. "Jonas, whatever you think—" "Sit down, Evadne." The use of my full name, spoken in that cold, controlled tone, made my legs give out. I sank onto the edge of our bed, while Jonas opened the folder and spread its contents across our comforter. Screenshots, dozens of them. My dating profile, complete with photos and bio. Message threads between Damon and me, printed in chronological order. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, credit card statements. A timeline of my affair laid out with the methodical precision that I'd always found boring in Jonas, but now recognized as terrifying. 4 months, he said, his voice steady despite the devastation in his eyes. 4 months of lies, hotel stays, fake conferences, and a dating app where you describe yourself as exploring connections. I stared at the evidence spread across our bed, my mind racing for explanations, justifications, anything that might salvage the situation. "Jonas, I can explain." 340 messages, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "That's how many times you and Damon Voss coordinated your meetings. Would you like me to read some of them aloud?" He picked up a stack of printed messages, and I saw my own words reflected back at me. Intimate conversations, romantic plans, complaints about my marriage that looked cruel and petty in black and white. "Please don't," I whispered. "Here's an interesting one from June 15th, Jonas said, ignoring my plea. "Jonas is so predictable and boring. He has no idea how to make a woman feel alive. I can't wait to escape with you this weekend." Hearing my own words spoken in Jonas's voice was like being slapped. I remembered writing that message, remembered feeling justified in my frustration, but now it sounded like the cruelest possible betrayal. Or this one from July 3rd. "I'm thinking about leaving him. He'd never fight for me anyway. He'd just accept it and move on. Some men aren't worth staying for." "Stop," I said, tears starting to blur my vision. "Please stop." Jonas set down the messages and picked up a hotel receipt. Hampton Inn, April 15th. Charged to our joint account, labeled as work travel. Except Dr. Bryn confirmed that you don't travel for work, don't need continuing education credits, and certainly don't attend weekend conferences. The methodical presentation of evidence was worse than shouting, worse than accusations. Jonas had built an airtight case against me, documented every lie with the same attention to detail he brought to his courier business. "The wellness retreat in Mendocino," he continued. 4 days, 3 nights, total cost of $3,200. Except it wasn't a retreat, was it? It was a romantic getaway with your travel agent boyfriend, paid for with money I earned while you were planning your next deception. I tried to speak, to offer some explanation that might soften the blow, but Jonas held up his hand. I'm not finished. Damon Voss, age 35, employed by Premier Travel Solutions, used his access to client databases to coordinate your meetings, booked hotel rooms using vendor rates, violated multiple company policies and professional ethics guidelines. I've already filed complaints with his employer and the state licensing board. The room was spinning. Not only had Jonas discovered my affair, but he'd systematically destroyed Damon's career in the process. You contacted his employer? Yesterday, along with the Better Business Bureau, the State Travel Agent Licensing Authority, and several professional organizations. Turns out using client information for personal relationships is a serious violation. He'll be lucky if he can get a job selling timeshares after this. I stared at Jonas, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The man I'd dismissed as boring and predictable had orchestrated the complete destruction of my affair with surgical precision. How long have you known? I asked. I suspected after your second hotel stay. I knew for certain after I found your dating profile in May. I've spent the last 3 months documenting everything, building a case, consulting with attorneys. Attorneys? Jonas reached into the folder and pulled out another set of papers. Divorce petition, I'm filing this afternoon. I'm also requesting full custody of Lena, citing your systematic deception, misappropriation of marital funds, and pattern of behavior that demonstrates unfitness as a parent. The words hit me like physical blows. You can't take Lena away from me. I can, and I will. You've spent 4 months lying to our daughter, using money meant for her college fund to finance your affair, disappearing for days at a time to play house with another man. What judge wouldn't question your priorities as a mother? I looked down at the evidence scattered across our bed, months of my life reduced to printouts and receipts, proof of every selfish choice I'd made. Jonas, please. We can work through this. I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? His composure finally cracked, and I heard real anger in his voice for the first time. You created a dating profile. You planned elaborate deceptions. You stole money from our joint account to pay for romantic getaways with another man. These weren't mistakes, Evadne. This was a calculated betrayal that lasted 4 months. He stood up and started gathering the papers, returning them to the folder with the same methodical care he'd used to compile them. I've changed the locks, he said. Your belongings are packed and in the garage. You have until this evening to arrange somewhere else to stay. This is my house too. Not anymore. The mortgage is in my name, purchased before our marriage. My attorney confirms that you have no legal claim to the property. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a situation that had spiraled completely out of my control. What about Lena? I need to explain. Lena is at my parents' house. She'll stay there until the custody hearing. My attorney advises against any unsupervised contact until then. The finality in his voice was terrifying. In the space of one conversation, I'd lost my marriage, my home, and my daughter. Jonas, please. I know I hurt you, but we have 8 years together. We have a child. That has to count for something. For a moment, his expression softened, and I saw a glimpse of the man I'd married. But then he looked at the folder in his hands, and his face hardened again. It counted for everything, he said quietly. That's why this hurts so much. He walked toward the bedroom door, then paused and turned back. One more thing. Dr. Bryn will be receiving copies of your expense reports and timesheets, along with documentation of your actual whereabouts during claimed work hours. She'll need to determine if your employment can continue. With that, he left me alone in our bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of the life I'd systematically destroyed. I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at the indentations on our comforter where the evidence had been spread, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Then I called Damon. We have a problem, I said when he answered. Jonas knows everything. There was a long pause. What do you mean, everything? Screenshots of our messages, hotel receipts, documentation going back 4 months. He's contacted your employer. Another pause, longer this time. Shit. Evadne, I can't. This is really bad for me professionally. I need to distance myself from this situation. Distance yourself? Damon, we're in this together. No, he said, and his voice was already different, colder. You're in this. We were just having fun. I never promised you anything permanent. The line went dead, and I realized that the man I'd risked everything for had just abandoned me without a second thought. I was alone, with nowhere to go and no one to blame but myself.